Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Drobo Broadcast Network. My name is Mario Blandini at Drobo, and today's topic is virtualization. Specifically, how to achieve an architecture for high availability in a VMware environment in a cost-effective manner. For a small business, the question really is, how small is your SAN? Is it small enough? And with us to discuss the topic today is special guest George Crump, who is President and Senior Analyst with Storage Switzerland, LLC. How are you doing today, George?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. As we look at the session abstract, whether you're a business manager or an IT manager, folks are turning to virtualization. And you can probably give some stats, George, that even small organizations have really taken that first step toward virtualization. But with virtualization comes some cool opportunities for IT people to increase availability for their applications. You just have to have their architecture correct to do that. And storage plays a big part in that. So this broadcast examines how data protection features within VMware can work to your advantage and how shared storage really enables the mobility and availability you're looking for. Before we get started, George, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your firm?
Sure, thanks, Mario. We're an analyst firm. We focus, as you might guess, on the storage space, but also kind of enveloped into that is cloud and virtualization. We get a lot of knowledge on these markets through product testing. We've had Drobos in our lab for, as long as I can remember now. So, and they're all still working great. So that helps a lot. Then, of course, we also get involved in real-world implementations and of course, with interactions with users and suppliers. We take all that information that we've gained and put it in articles and briefing reports, case studies, lab reports up on our website, which is listed there on the screen.
Yeah, and I love your research, George, because it tends to also include a lot of value for folks in smaller organizations, not just the big company stuff, but stuff that's really, really practical, which is why I'm glad to have you as a guest. And as you mentioned, you have a Drobo. You're yourself a small business, so you live this stuff every day, protecting your own data, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, our first Drobo, the guy was one of the first iSCSI units, and it became really a core part of our daily operations outside of just business. And it's been running flawlessly for, has it been 3 years, 4 years almost?
Yeah, it's fantastic, and I love the story. Let's talk about virtualization for a small business. If you have only one server, people might say, why do I need to virtualize at all? But one might argue that even if you only have one server today, there's a reason to start looking at virtualization. And for the most part, we find within Drobo customers that small businesses have already a handful, if not several, virtual servers or servers that they could virtualize or are already virtualizing. So talk to us about your recommendations to a small business when it comes to thinking about when to do server virtualization and why they would want to do that.
Yeah, we have kind of a virtualized first mentality for small businesses. So really, even from your first server purchase, we suggest starting with virtualization. And that can include the only thing you have virtualized is that very first server, because while that may seem a little weird, it does give you some flexibility. If you buy two pieces of hardware, it gives you the ability to move that virtual instance around in case something goes wrong. But really what we see happen very quickly, these things are kind of like rabbits. Once you get your first server, there's an immediate need for a second and a third. And so we see those develop pretty quickly. In fact, if you look at some of the packaging from the operating system vendors nowadays, they're all in their kind of small business bundles. They're including 2 or 3 applications that would do well in a virtualized environment.
No doubt. And today's microwave society, I think service levels have become very unrealistic. I loved the days back when, with mainframes, which were also virtualized, you had all weekend to do your maintenance. Seems today, these days, you really can't do that sort of thing, and people want it up all the time, even in a small organization. So we show here that the key value, once you virtualize a machine, beyond the economics, certainly the business folks get behind the fact you can spend less money on server hardware, but the big win for an IT person is this mobility. Now talk to us about what the advantages are there. I know what they are around maintenance, but maybe give us some examples of how that really enables a small business IT person to be a lot more productive.
Yeah, I think that the ability to move an instance from one machine to another is certainly, I think the big one for small businesses is going to be that maintenance situation or a failed server, something along those lines. I had a friend of mine that runs also a small business this weekend. his web server went down, and he had backups, but he was down all weekend while the recovery happened. He had no way to get his application over to another server, and he happens to run a type of business where weekend is a very busy time for him, and one of his top traffic times to his site. And he did all the right stuff, so to speak, but it still took him 3 or 4 hours, I think it was, to recover, and then he had to reinstall everything, and all the things you sort of don't think of.
Absolutely. So that maintenance thing, a lot of folks say they get to do their IT job during normal working hours versus during the odd hours when we used to do this stuff. Because if you can move an application and do your hardware maintenance on the system with the applications live and up and running somewhere else, sure, you'll tell your customers or your application owners that you're moving it, but you're just giving them an FYI that it's moving, but it's not going down. And folks really love that sort of thing. Going to our next slide about shared storage and the role that it plays in server virtualization. We said it on the previous slide. In order to have mobility, you must have shared storage. And as we described here, it's because each host can then access the storage. Thus, you can have freedom to move that application to any one of the physical servers as long as it knows how to find its storage volume. So in addition to doing the mobility, what other things does this give you? Because there's some cool applicability to high availability here, which people might not think of when they're first doing a server virtualization project.
Right, yeah, we look at it, there's 3 big values, right? You've got the mobility, the ability to move a application from one server to the other, and that could be not only just a maintenance situation, but a performance situation. Say that you have a new server come in and you have an application that's running a little slow. All you have to do is stand up that server and using a product like vMotion is move the virtual machine from host A to host B, and you're going, right, and you're going faster. So that's a huge capability. And then from a high availability and resiliency standpoint, again, and to your point earlier, Mario, the problem is that small businesses now are kind of graded on the same scale that an enterprise is as far as availability. When people come to your website, they don't really have a feel for how small you are, and it's no longer cute if you will, to be down, right? I mean, everybody expects everything up all the time, and so that same pressure is on a small business as well, and virtualization really allows them to continue to look like a big boy even when things are going haywire behind the scenes. So it gives you that resiliency that you kind of need in running the business. Finally, it also gives you some capability from a storage standpoint. We can, those pods, if you will, those little blue cylinders on the screen are representative of the different virtual machine images. If we had another storage system, we could even move that one of those cylinders to another system even for migration or, again, maintenance, anything we need to do.
Specific approaches to doing some of this high availability will be discussed throughout the presentation here in the architecture. Our point, having been serving this market for a while now, is that smaller businesses and departments within larger ones that are operating independently of a larger corporate IT, they've historically been roadblocked from doing a lot of these high availability things because shared storage can be the most expensive part of the entire virtualization project. So what folks are often looking for is the right size of storage that can go with this to create the architecture that allows them to scale, allows them to take advantage of the features built into virtualization, but in a budget factor, form factor that really fits the needs of a smaller organization. So as we go to the next slide, the basic architecture. Odds are you already have a lot of the elements that you need in order to do these high availability solutions. You'd need some servers naturally. We're showing VMware here. And with a shared storage network, you can move a virtual machine between physical servers with your vCenter server management console. So most of the hardware that you'd have in place is probably there in terms of servers. Storage, you don't need 2 network storage devices, but you can take advantage of some of the cool features if you do have 2 storage devices. Primarily, you need at least 1 set of reliable storage to support HA. And the virtualization software, as we'll describe here, supports a lot of these high availability features built in. We can recommend lots of other applications that could add benefits for backup and replication, but a lot of the stuff is already built in. So let's talk about requirements, George, because when folks are out shopping for this storage device that they need in order to have high availability. Certainly, if they're getting quotes from the name brand vendors, they'd see that a lot of times the drives, they have no choice in selecting those. It's very specific configurations. And some of the products are designed for the enterprise, where they might have a full-time storage person. You yourself are a small business owner. How many IT guys do you have?
Well, we're probably cheated because we're all IT guys, but analysts are worse. So, but yeah, I think the really it's me that does most of the IT operations and then just yells at other people in the company. So
yeah,
so it's a real challenge. There's not, in larger departments, there's a guy that we'll typically call the storage guy. He might have a more formal title like storage manager, but people within the organization know him as the storage guy. We talk here in the SMB. Frankly, you're lucky if you have an IT guy who is just an IT guy, right? He probably is doing something else. Many times I find the accounting guy also gets labeled the IT guy, which I don't know how that happened, but too bad for the accounting guy, I guess. But so that's really the key thing. And then we had this strategy we talked about in the beginning that we like to see people virtualize from the very first server. And the immediate reaction I get if it's negative to that statement is always about storage, because if they've gone out and started down that path, they've looked at the cost of a shared storage system. And the major manufacturers all have, quote unquote entry level systems, but they're enterprise type of methodologies trying to cram into an SMB, and in many cases that just doesn't fit well.
Right, not just from a budget standpoint, but also just having the knowledge to manage that, and that's where we feel that Drobo is a great fit, because our products are as simple to manage as following a traffic signal. So
exactly.
It allows people to spend time where they really have the knowledge. You have to know a little bit about VMware to make this work, but most people who are VMware administrators, that IT person, the jack of all trades, probably don't want to become a storage expert. If they do, they may not want to become a storage expert for all the tiers of data that are in there. So from a requirement standpoint, certainly it's got to be easy. Cost-effective is probably number one, because it's what drove the server virtualization project in the first place, to save money. You want, in our opinion, to use the features that are built into the hypervisor. Why pay twice? Do you see this as a viable strategy for a small business, leveraging the tools already built into VMware?
Yeah, I think it's critical. First of all, it goes back to keeping it easy, because you're able to, you don't have to learn a whole nother set of capabilities, since most of the stuff is in the hypervisor. To your point, you're going to save on cost, because even when you see a vendor say it's free or it's bundled or it's included, we all know nothing in life is free, right? I mean, it's at some point you're paying for something, and so that's always an issue. And I'll tell you, even to a manufacturer level, when we're consulting with storage manufacturers, we say, look, stop adding storage features. Focus on reliability and uptime and things that data protection, things that could really help the customer, because most of the stuff that you're going to spend development dollars on is going to end up being in the hypervisor anyways, right? So yeah, we're huge proponents of using the features within the hypervisor.
And iSCSI is a good technology match for these criteria. Cost-effective, certainly compared to other technologies, and becoming an easy implementation with the right type of performance for a small and medium business. Let's talk about how to leverage the virtualization architecture. I think a lot of folks are concerned about lots of eggs in one basket and what that might entail in terms of potential failure, but at the same time, going to that architecture and having the abstraction allows you to some high availability features. Talk about what people should think about when they're building their virtualization architecture, because they can mitigate a lot of the concerns if they build it correctly.
Yeah, I tend to look at it as a lot of eggs in a few baskets, because we typically are going to recommend some redundancy throughout. You're typically going to have more than one physical server, as we've talked about. You're going to put in secondary cabling for your network, and again, that's very cost effective. Network cabling, especially at the SMB market, is very cost effective. Frankly, to add a second connection is almost a rounding error. And from that, you get the ability. So I think it's very common to look at this as a lot of eggs in one basket, but what you really end up with is a lot of baskets. So you can migrate virtual servers between machines. You end up with some fault tolerance. Now you have storage replication capabilities built in. So that brings a lot of actually increased reliability rather than the concern of everything crashing.
Well, let's talk performance, because naturally when the application starts running slow, everyone points the fingers at the IT guy. And if the IT person was the one that chose to put all the applications onto a small number of servers, potentially they could get the blame for this. So in your analysis, having looked at a lot of the deployments for a small business, is performance a concern, or are these multi-core, large-scale memory systems that people are buying today as a virtual server, are they robust enough to handle a handful of applications at the same time? Because people inherently don't like to share, but we're almost getting to the point in an architecture today that you need to share in order to even make full utilization of the hardware.
Yeah, the physical server today can comfortably handle 2 to 3 without any modification applications, no problem at all. You know, in reality, you can take it up significantly higher than that. Considering that most server class products that a small business would buy are probably going to be i7 based, probably going to have multiple cores. You know, at a minimum, what we find is you can comfortably run at least one virtual machine per core and see relatively no performance degradation as a result. So yeah, I wouldn't be concerned about that typically. And when we talk to people, usually what we find is that they were concerned about performance going in, and now they're trying to figure out ways to put even more on the systems because they haven't even scratched the surface of performance yet.
And from a storage perspective, people see technologies like 10 gig and they see 16 gig fiber channel, that being the state of the art. Naturally, small and medium businesses don't need that, but gigabit iSCSI might look a little bit small compared to those high-speed interfaces. In a small server cluster like a VMware Essentials Plus, gigabit iSCSI in your testing is satisfactory, or does it too only scratch the surface and give you a lot of headroom?
No, yeah, it's very satisfactory. And you know, again, we're in a lab where we're trying to make things break. So we find it for the standard business stuff that you would do, like SQL, Exchange, things like that, web serving. These are sort of small, bursty type of things, especially in the small business. You're not just clogging the network down with big transfers. So we find that the gigabit network is fine for the small business, and if it does become a performance problem, the ability to concatenate, if you will, those connections exists. So there's a lot of life left in the 1 gig space, especially in the SMB.
Well, as we put it all together, we show here, George, a gigi network, and it's true. We show a single line connecting all the elements, but with a VMware solution, you can have multiple gigi connections coming out of your server and use multipathing within VMware to get not just higher availability across those connections, but increased throughput. So that's something that's available and fairly straightforward to configure. In fact, Drobo has a how-to guide on exactly how to do that posted on our website. We'll give you that information here shortly. But our recommendation in terms of a target solution here would be the VMware Essentials Plus kit. It gives you up to 3 hosts. You mentioned virtualizing from your very first server, George. In this case, you'd virtualize your first server, get a couple of VMs, go to a second server for the ability to do migration. You can even have a third server, which in your view, does that cover most small businesses? That could give you a dozen to 24 different VMs. That's quite a big environment.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go. Is 3 hosts in the especially if they're modern processors, i5s or i7s, you're comfortably going to run 9 to 15 virtual servers in that. And at that point, I think once you get beyond, back in the old days of 6 years ago, we thought that people with 20 servers were a medium-sized business. So, yeah, I think that comfortably scales for everything a small business would need.
And the way VMware does their licensing these days with this VRAM, 192 gig, it is a very big number, but certainly people who remember Bill Gates' comment from way back about 64K would say, hey, well, should I always be cautious about those scalability limits? Do people need more than 192 gig of RAM in your opinion? It seems to be quite satisfactory, balanced against 3 servers and potentially 24 VMs.
Yeah, I think that the 192 gig is fine for almost every situation. You know, you're typically going to lock in a VM at about 2 to 4 gigs each. So kind of do the math on that. We're talking about 3 or 4 VMs per host. I think you're fine. You know, as an absolute worst case, you can very inexpensively put an SSD drive inside the host and then do paging out to that. So when VMware runs out of memory, it'll start paging to typically a hard disk. Well, if we page out to a solid state disk, the response time is almost as good as RAM. So you can, if that really became an issue, there's a very simple workaround. But I think that, you know, for our audience, maybe 10% of the people would ever hit that.
Right. Now, from a Drobo perspective, Drobo has 2 products that fit into this category of solutions for small and medium business. Our Drobo Model B1200i has dual power supplies. It also has support for those SSD drives that you mentioned, George, and a very cool automated data-aware tiering solution that helps scale up and automatically accelerate transactional applications, the type of thing that a small business IT person would love because there's no tuning involved. They can set it and forget it and get the benefits of that acceleration. We have a B800i, which has a single power supply. We're showing it here as a target for VMware data recovery. So you mentioned your friend's example. Had he had a VM and had he done a recent data recovery snapshot of that VM, he could have had it up in a matter of moments, huh?
Absolutely, yep.
So that's what we're showing here. And for a second copy or for tier 2 applications or for high capacity, lesser criticality type applications, that type of storage device works well. But you don't need both Drobos in order to make the solution work. One iSCSI SAN storage would be enough to put the basic configuration together. But once you go to this architecture, George, you have freedom to expand on this rather easily so that as both capacity grow and the application processing needs grow, you can scale out horizontally once you've gone to this architecture pretty easily.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, there's just a ton of flexibility in that, and you know, especially with the SSD and data-aware tiering, I mean, that really moves. This allows this solution to really grow with a small business to to that 20-25 server level comfortably. Because obviously, you know, I would assume anyways that most small businesses, when they hit that point, they want to keep getting bigger, and this is a solution that would scale with them.
Right. I think that's one of the things folks never want to make a decision that locks them into a certain size, and then they'll end up regretting it later. The great thing about going with this basic architecture is there is a limit, though, with VMware Essentials Plus Kit. It is 3 physical servers at a good price, roughly $5,000 US. You can scale past that naturally, but you'd be getting into standard edition pricing, which by the time you have that problem and you're being that successful, odds are the finance folks will be able to fund that project because the business is so successful. How many VMs can you consolidate onto one server? You said 3 or 4. Is there a hard limit? How do people go about sizing that? Because I think sometimes when folks are first going out, they're a little bit cautious. You mentioned maybe start with 1 and go up from there after you prove that it's good to go. What number should people have in their head?
Boy, you know, I really don't like. It's kind of like you guys in drives. I don't really want to fence people in. The i7 that we have running a lot of our business applications. We actually have 6 virtual machines running on it right now with no problem, and you know, we're careful with it. But that's probably the upper edge of what you would do with a base server. But it really depends. You know, I always find that people are very cautious in this space as they move in. So that's where we like. Virtualize the first one, virtualize the second one, see how it's going, and you know, just keep adding judiciously as you go along. Keep an eye on things, make sure that you know things aren't going to break on you or whatever. But it just depends on the application. You know, I wouldn't, for example, virtualize 4 Microsoft SQL servers. That would probably be stretching it. But a mixture of like a SQL server and maybe an average web server, things like that, I think you're fine.
With a file server on top of that, with not too many users, that tends to work well and balance out the capacity. We have a comment here on the line, which is a great comment. You shouldn't go too crazy on your server if you plan on using VMware Essentials Plus kits because you are limited to 2 CPUs. So you don't want to go past 2 CPUs in a server for that. But most small businesses wouldn't be buying a a quad CPU box either. So fantastic recommendation there. The same person is asking, though, from a storage perspective, George, when do you choose iSCSI versus choosing NAS, NFFs or CIFs as the storage for your virtualization? Because there's some pros and cons, and for small businesses, they may think the file sharing would be easier, but how do you play out there in terms of when to select a block technology like iSCSI versus putting it directly onto a NAS?
I'll tell you, in the small business, that's a really kind of close call, if you will. To be honest with you, I wouldn't make my decision based on protocol. Certainly in the SMB space, both iSCSI and NAS play pretty comfortably in the VMware environment. What I would look for instead, assuming that one of those two protocols is available to you, is I would look at what the capabilities of the physical hardware are, because I don't think, maybe with some rare exceptions, I don't think the protocol is going to make or break the SMB if one picks NAS or other picks iSCSI. There's certain advantages and disadvantages to both. You guys in the Drobo installation process have made starting iSCSI up, incredibly easy. So I would say that that wouldn't be my determinant. What would be it for me is what can the physical hardware do and how well does it complement VMware.
Right, both of them would use a gigabit Ethernet port, and the reason Drobo prefers iSCSI, we make file sharing devices too, but we prefer iSCSI for VMware, and our products are certified with VMware there because it is more efficient, and you can scan for storage adapters, pick those up within VMware, and create your data stores there. And it overall is a more efficient protocol there. And from a price perspective, there's very little penalty that you would be paying in the total solution cost going with iSCSI, but it gives you more flexibility, in our opinion, to do things in a more data center-like fashion for a small and medium business. So it copies the same architectures that the large organizations would be using with fiber channel and 10 gig iSCSI in a smaller package that's easy to use. So thanks, George, for those comments. VMware is the topic of today's discussion, but Drobo does work absolutely well with Citrix Zen Server. It's certified with Citrix Zen Server, and we do have customers using it in Hyper-V, not yet taking advantage of the live migration between Hyper-V servers, but that's something that's coming for Drobo's Model B1200 High very shortly here in the first half of 2012. Another question, the local drive. I've always wondered, someone has a local drive in a vSphere server. Do they use it for something? You talked about maybe making that an SSD and using it for paging, but what should they put on the SAN, and what should they put on their local drive? I think that's a question that people have when they're first getting into a virtual server.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. At a minimum, 99.9% of the time, even the enterprise, you're going to boot the host off of a local device. We've become very much advocates of that local device now being some form of solid state. As I said before, first of all, it makes for pretty quick boots. If you have a MacBook Air or something, you're now experienced that. But also, as you run into, if and when you run into memory conditions, while the VMware is limited to the 192K or meg gig in RAM, it's not really limited in what it pages to. So the paging makes a big difference if it's coming from SSD. So we like that as a recommendation. Also because most of your capacity now is going to be on that shared storage device, right? So you don't need a lot of capacity locally. So instead of spending your money on terabytes of storage that you're not going to use because it's going to be on the shared system, spend your money on gigabytes of storage, but very, very high speed in the form of solid state.
Fantastic advice. And so another question I have here, can I mix VMware and non-virtualized servers in the same SAN? My opinion is absolutely yes. And a lot of folks will actually do that because maybe they don't jump both feet into the deep end into virtualization straight away. Maybe they keep a couple of their biggest applications on physical servers and start to virtualize some of the lesser applications in their environment. That's quite a common start that people will make when doing their virtualization or their path to the cloud, as everyone seems to say these days.
In our world, we have a lot of Macs. We attach Macs to our Drobo. via iSCSI, right? So that's another situation too, where you just have a platform that doesn't make sense to virtualize.
Yeah, how about the case, though, George, where someone's really scared of virtualizing something like Exchange? Microsoft's done a good job in doing detailed best practices as to how to deploy Exchange for the most optimal environment. If people put a bunch of energy into making that work perfectly on a physical server, maybe they don't ever virtualize that one. But do you ever see a situation where someone might virtualize all of their storage but use the internal disks for something that's very high performance that isn't suitable for gigabit iSCSI, something like a small SQL database that's very transactional or Exchange? Do you see people using the local storage on the server for that, but then using the SAN where it's best suited, which is the high capacity and mobility for the other applications?
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's a configuration you could go with. Again, that's and most of those applications you mentioned have the ability to kind of direct different components of themselves, either locally or remotely, on a shared device. So what you're kind of looking for there is if you have something that's either very large transfers that would clog up the network, or extremely chatty where it's always on the network. So taking that off of the load could help. Although I got to tell you, it's pretty rare to see a situation where a gigabit, in the SMB space, where a gigabit SAN doesn't more than do the trick.
Well, that was the topic of today's discussion, talking about these architectures, really understanding from your point of view what is it that folks need to be aware of when they're thinking about doing this. So I appreciate you taking time with us today, George. The key takeaways for today: shared storage is required if you want to take full advantage of virtualization. There are iSCSI SAN solutions that exist at an affordable cost. Drobo is among the vendors there, and we like to think that ours are the absolute easiest to use, and we'd love to talk to you more about those specifics. We have plenty of videos on our website that could show you exactly what we mean there. The VMware vSphere Essentials Plus kit, it contains fault tolerance and high availability features. It's great for a small business. It does cost money. It's not the free version, but certainly something well worthwhile to look into if you want to take advantage of these high availability features. It's our opinion that if you're taking the step into virtualization for the cost savings, why not get all the operational and high availability benefits while you're at it? And it doesn't cost a lot to do that when you're mixing VMware Essentials Plus and a cost-effective Drobo SAN. There are other data protection tools available for SMBs. They work great on Drobo storage, whether it's Veeam, Acronis, Symantec, Aperture, and the list goes on and on and on. If you want to add some data protection or replication to your virtual environment, those are also available there. With that, I want to thank you very much for participating in today's program. And thanks, George. I appreciate you being on today and giving us some insight into this topic.
Oh, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, check George out on Twitter at Storage Swiss, or on his website that we list there. There's a dash in the storageswitzerland.com. And for more information on how to do this particular solution with Drobo, you can go read our white paper, which was written by George. Thank you very much. Fantastic look into the particular architectural choices in a VMware environment for a small business, as well as a how-to guide that can walk you through step-by-step exactly how to deploy it in detail. With that, I thank everyone for participating. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Drobo Broadcast Network. Thanks again.